Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Today is my October wrap up and I read 7 books in October, which is pretty good going. I'm a little bit behind I think for my yearly goal, which I think is 121 this year, because I read 120 last year and it's always one more than the previous year. So I think I am going to try and read a little bit more in November and December, which should be all right because it's Christmas, it's like cozy season. I've got a couple of free weekends, so yeah, I'll just get more reading done then. But 7 is still pretty good going, and it was like a pretty good month in terms of like ratings as well. Bit mixed, but like overall pretty decent. Yeah, so let's get into it. Okay, so up first is a very small short read, which is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which I picked up in Bristol in a bookshop called Heron Bookshop. Or Heron Books, I can't remember off the top of my head, which is a tiny little bookshop in Bristol, which is really great, and the bookseller there is amazing, and she gave me this as a recommendation and I really enjoyed it. So it's historical fiction, it's set in Ireland in 1985, and it's very much just a short story, to be honest. We don't really move around in time very much. I think it's really set over a very short period of time in this town in Ireland, mainly about the main character, who is called Bill Furlong. But there are quite a lot of other characters in it as well, and a lot of sort of moving pieces and other things going on. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. I think when I was reading it, I didn't necessarily understand the point of it. It feels pretty immersive. It's set like near Christmas. It's quite cold, quite snowy, so it feels pretty immersive. And I'm actually going to do a video later on in the year about books that I think are perfect for Christmas, and I do think that this is one of them. It's definitely got that like cozy feeling to it, and because it's a short story you can read it in one sitting if you want to. I think it's just under or just over 100 pages, so yeah, if you had an afternoon free over Christmas or an evening, you could probably do it in one sitting. So like I said, it's about Bill Furlong and this small Irish town, but it's also got a history of Magdalen laundries in it, and that focuses a lot of the story. And there's a note at the text, I think, at the end, where the author talks a little bit about the fact that I don't think this is based on true story, but it's based on true historical events in Ireland, and sort of takes a lot from true history and what actually happened then. So that part of it is really interesting, and it brings a lot of pertinence to the book, which I really enjoyed. But like I said, I think it's a really brilliant book because of how immersive it is, because of how realistic the characters feel, and I felt really connected to it the whole time. So I really enjoyed it, and I probably would give it 5 stars actually, because I don't think there's much about it that I didn't like. Next up is A Secret History of Witches by Louisa Morgan, which was a perfect read for October. I wanted a few like sort of spooky horror reads because it was October, and this I think ticked a lot of those boxes. So going into this, I didn't really know what to expect, apart from the fact that it might be a bit fantasy, which I am not used to reading. So I tried to go in with an open mind, because sometimes when I read fantasy I have to remember that sometimes it's just not for me, but that doesn't mean it's a bad book. So this is a really interesting way to lay out a novel. So it is set, I think, over 5 or potentially 6 periods of time in total. But they all sort of jump maybe like 30 years ahead each time, and we start off in 1821 and it ends in 1937, I think this is. So it spans just over 100 years, and yeah, like I said, it's 5 or 6 different parts, and they all jump like 30 years each time. Now it all follows one family throughout that whole time period, and generally speaking, the way that the jumps work is that we follow one woman, and then the next bit will be her daughter, and then the one after that will be her daughter's daughter, etc, etc, etc. So we all follow the same family line, and so all of them are very much connected, but they all do have their own individual stories, and because each one has a different protagonist, it does feel very separate and individual, but also feels very tied to everything else. So the book introduces us to this family in France in the 1800s, and they are being persecuted, they're being hunted by witch hunters. They believe that their family line, their like bloodline, line, their connection to being witches is about to end, because their like Grandmere Ursula, I think her name is, she dies, and she is the last one in the family who is a witch, who is able to possess the powers that they know their family is capable of having. So she dies, and they believe that the like line ends with her. However, it becomes apparent as we jump through time and as we meet more of her descendants that it probably isn't dead, and that actually some of her descendants do possess these powers and these abilities that she had. Now, I think that going into it, like I said, I tried to go in with an open mind. I wasn't sure how witchy it would actually be. And from somebody who doesn't read a lot of fantasy, who doesn't love really like fantastical storylines, I think this is actually a really perfect like light fantasy immersion into the genre. When I put this in my October TBR, I always put the genre in my little post that I do, and I describe this as a historical fiction rather than a fantasy, and I still very much stand by that. The story really immerses you in the point in history, and we really understand like how these women are living, while living very much in a patriarchal society, are expected to have certain roles in society because they're women. They're also quite outcast from society because of the rumours that kind of go around about their family and what they can do. So yeah, that part of it I think is quite immersive in the historical element of it, and actually the fantasy element is kind of secondary to that. There's a lot of really interesting storylines about mother-daughter relationships, about familial relationships generally, and like I said, a little bit about sort of like patriarchal values and what it is to be a woman in certain points in history. So I really loved it for that, and I thought it did it brilliantly. I also thought it executed the parts of the plot that were about the like witchy powers really well as well. They were very subtle, they were very relevant to the storyline, and yeah, it was just a very subtle way to have witches in this story. What I didn't love about this book, I won't say it explicitly because it is a spoiler, but in one of the final parts of it, we are introduced to a character who becomes quite important to the storyline, and at that point I did sort of lose interest a little bit because I thought it was a little bit far-fetched, and it also was very unnecessary. Like, this book isn't based on true events, and I thought trying to tie it too much to reality just wasn't necessary. It didn't need to happen. We didn't need to see any characters that we recognised. They could all just be new and fresh to this story and this book. So that for me did ruin it a little bit, and I think up until that point it was probably a 5-star book, but because of that it's only going to be a 4-star read, because I think that did ruin it a little bit for me. Then I read Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Like I said, I wanted to read some horror, and I had been told that this is sort of like body horror. I'm not good with like jump scares or anything that's too spooky or scary, but I had been very assured by my friends who have read it that this wasn't going to be that. So I decided to read it, and I can confirm it definitely wasn't that. So Our Wives Under the Sea is about a couple called Leah and Miri, and I've forgotten which way around they are. Oh, Leah has a deep sea mission. She goes into a submarine for her job, and Miri stays at home, and before this, as a couple, they have a very good relationship, they have a happy marriage, and they are just, you know, a normal couple living their life. But when Leah returns from this submarine mission from the sea, their relationship becomes changed, and so is Leah. So it completely redefines their relationship to each other and how they can sort of continue to be in this marriage, and actually for Leah to continue to be in the world as well. So there are a lot of different I think elements to the book. I personally thought it was a really beautiful exploration of marriage and of autonomy and of our own ability to choose how we live our life and how we continue to live despite events that have happened to us, despite things that are out of our control. I thought it explored that really, really well. It then has this other part to it, which is about Leah and her deep sea mission and what happened down there and how that affected her, and that bit is the kind of horror part to it. It's the bit that feels a little bit supernatural, a bit spooky, a bit I think it can kind of get as dark as you want it to be based on how vivid your imagination is, based on how you fill in like the missing parts of what Leah has explained to Miri and to the readers of the book, because it definitely leaves a lot to the imagination, in that I think a lot of it is up to your own interpretation and is up to you to sort of decipher and understand as much as you want to. It's not very clear cut, it doesn't really give you answers, it doesn't really lay out an obvious storyline in black and white. You do have to sort of interpret it how you want to, which I think was really cool, and I really liked it for that. But I can also understand why people find it frustrating, because I don't think it's a very satisfying book in terms of, like I said, giving you clear-cut answers to things. It doesn't do that. It wants to kind of leave the mystery in. So if you like that and you like the sound of that, then I think you will love it. But if you want something that's like, you know, that gives you the satisfaction a murder mystery or a whodunit does, you're not going to get that from this. But I also really loved the ending. I thought it, again, was really beautiful. I actually did get a little bit of satisfaction from it, but I know that it won't be to everybody's taste. So this might be one that you didn't love, but I think you should appreciate it for what it tried to achieve, and I really loved it, so I give it 5 stars. Next up was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, which is by Laurie Gilmore. Again, this felt really good for autumn. I really wanted something like cozy and fun, and this was a romance, and it was called The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, so I was like, perfect for October. I went into it just wanting a light-hearted romance, and I definitely did get that. So the book follows our protagonist. I can't remember her name and I can't look at the blurb either because it's on a Kindle, but she moves to a small town because she takes over a cafe from her aunt, I believe, who has retired, and she previously has a very like high-flying city job, and her boss recently had a heart attack in the office and died, and it was very much from stress because it was like a high-flying city job. I think it was in like accounting or something, I can't remember, but you know, very corporate job, very city job, and she, I think, was his assistant, and she had a bit of a wake-up call when he died because she didn't want to end up like him. So in order to avoid that, she moves to this small town to take over this cafe from her aunt because she wants just like a quieter, slower pace to life. And while there are a few things that start happening. So she moves into her aunt's flat, and during the night, I think it might be actually the first night that she's there, she hears some noises that wake her up in the middle of the night, and some weird things started happening. So she enlists the help of the hunky delivery man who has delivered her, I think, a load of like pumpkins because he runs a farm. So he's like a farmer. He runs a farm in the town and he's very well known by the townspeople. He recently was heartbroken when he proposed to his girlfriend in front of the whole town and was rejected by her, and she then moved back to her city life. It's a very Hallmark movie if you haven't really got that from my description so far. So these two start a romance, and also he is enlisted to help her work out why these things start happening in her flat. So it's like a romance, but also with this mystery, which was completely unnecessary, to be perfectly honest. I don't know why it was needed. The storyline is pretty terrible in terms of the mystery. But the things I did love about it, I liked that it wasn't an enemies to lover romance for once. It was very much just a clear-cut plain romance, which I really loved. It's very like, it gives you the safety and the familiarity of a Hallmark movie. So if you love like a Christmas Hallmark movie where everything's very predictable and cheesy and kind of terrible, you're gonna love this. If you don't like that and you want something like decent and original, you're probably not going to get that from this. It is pretty terrible, but I am the kind of person who, as long as I know it's terrible and as long as I am in the mood for something terrible, I actually can appreciate that it's good, because I enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying something even if it is kind of terrible. And I think terrible is something you kind of love in romances sometimes. So similarly to Our Wives Under the Sea, I think you'll love it if you do want what it's going to give you, which is a terrible cliched romance. If you don't want that, then don't bother picking it up because you probably will feel like you've wasted your time. And I gave that 3 stars overall. Next up was If We Were Villains by ML Rio, which was the Amy's Book Club pick for this month. Oh, I should have mentioned Pumpkin Spice Cafe was the Amy's Book Club buddy read pick for October as well. So we read 2 books every month, a main pick which we discuss on Zoom at the end of the month, and then the buddy read pick which we talk about on Instagram on the every Saturday. We like read up to a certain chapter and then discuss it every week. So that's a lot more informal. This is our proper like formal pick, which like I said we discuss on Zoom. So I was really excited to read this. I'd seen it everywhere. I've seen everybody rave about it. Like everybody loves this book, so I was really looking forward to it. It's also kind of dark academia, which I was a little bit concerned about because I have read The Secret History and I did not like that, which is kind of a very classic dark academia read. So I was really hoping I was going to love this. So this is set in a prestigious school. I think it's like a drama school. Well, no, it is a drama school, or like a performing arts school, creative school, something like that. And it follows 6 of the students there who have a very like tight-knit relationship. They are all very obsessed with drama, with acting, with Shakespeare, and with performing as well. Now, the main character in this is a character called Oliver, and right at the beginning of the novel we find out that he has been serving time in prison for murder, and that is about 10 years in the future to the main part of the story. And the story basically follows Oliver while he's at school with these 5 other students, and it is about finding out who is murdered, it's about finding out whether Oliver actually did it, and it's about finding out, if he didn't do it, who actually did murder whoever has been murdered, the victim. And yeah, so it was like a very gripping book. I really wanted a murder mystery, again, perfect for October, and I think it did tick a lot of those boxes. Now, the book is, similarly to The Secret History, a little bit pretentious. I think the author must have a very deep love for Shakespeare, and that is very evident in the book, and also it comes through in all of the characters' love for Shakespeare as well, which is really great. I think if you can appreciate that and it's something you want to read, it's a bit different and it's fun and it's unique, and I loved it for that. But it does make a lot of the book a little bit difficult to follow because there are very large passages that are pulled straight from Shakespeare. The 6 characters, the 6 students, often will quote Shakespeare, and not even quote Shakespeare just sort of, you know, one line. They will actually have conversations using Shakespearean dialogue, but within the situation they're actually in. So that does make it a little bit hard to follow. However, from someone who did Shakespeare as their dissertation, and so from someone who should understand a lot of Shakespeare, I can confirm that if you sort of skim read that, you're not really going to miss out much. You are going to still understand a lot of the plot. I think it's one of those things where maybe you would understand it on a deeper level if you really understood all of the dialogue, but otherwise it's not that necessary to properly read or understand. You can kind of skip it. It's not the end of the world. You can gather a lot of what is being said from like the reactions of the other characters or just from like their general behaviour, so it's okay. But like I said, very unique, so I appreciate it for that. And going back to what I said before, it's also pretty pretentious, but the difference is The Secret History, I think, is an unbearable pretentious. It was like so, just so self-obsessed. Every character is awful and unlikable and unrelatable as well. Whereas I think this is a different kind of pretentious. It's kind of a lovable pretentious, a very self-aware pretentious, which I kind of respected it for. It's definitely easier to digest than The Secret History. The plot itself is actually quite easy to follow, as is all of like the interactions with the characters and like the storyline that leads up to the big murder plot as well. So I think it's a very relatable, and yeah, like I said, it's definitely something that, you know, everybody could pick up and enjoy. I don't think it's just made for people who like Shakespeare. Yeah, so going back to the actual plot itself, the murder mystery, I think it was really interesting because it's set obviously in a school, and these people are all very young. They're all students, and so they're all very fallible. They make a lot of poor decisions sometimes, they make mistakes, but again, I think it just makes them more likeable and more relatable, which we didn't get in The Secret History. So I liked it for that, and I think that's what a lot of people in my book club also said. This wasn't a book that was loved by everybody in the book club, but I think the general consensus was that the characters themselves were ultimately quite likeable because there was a good like variety of characters within them, and you could understand, you know, like what their intentions were and why they made the mistakes that they did. So I kind of liked it for that. The plot itself, I think, is very gripping in terms of the fact you want to know who committed the murder, whether it was Oliver, whether it wasn't Oliver, and then, you know, what happened in the aftermath, how Oliver ended up in prison. So I think for that it is very gripping and therefore quite fast paced. You can read it quite quickly despite the fact it's actually quite a long book. So yeah, I think this has definitely lived up to its hype, and I'm really grateful for that, and I would recommend it as well for something that's like gripping, for something that's quite different. And yeah, I give this one 4 stars. The penultimate read of the month was The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness, which is the first book in the Chaos Walking series. I have all 3. I've had them for ages, I just haven't ever got around to reading them, and yeah, this is book 1, so I decided to pick it up. So this is a dystopia set sometime in the future, And it is about a boy called Todd who lives in Prentisstown, and he is about to become a man, and that is quite important to the plot. So, like I said, it's dystopia, so like the rules of society, the rules of the world are very different to how they are now. And one of the biggest differences is that the characters in the book, in Prentisstown, when we first meet them, have this thing called noise. And what noise is, it's a mixture of words and pictures, and it basically is everything that the characters are thinking and feeling, and they are constantly surrounded by this noise. They can hear other people's noise, so it is very hard to have any privacy, to have any secrets, and you will know what everybody's thinking. Now, right off the bat, there's some suspicious things going on, mainly that there are no women in Prentisstown. So Todd is the last man in Prentisstown, the last boy to turn into a man. So the youngest person in the town, and there are no women at all. So I think it's already intriguing from the beginning, because you begin to question, well, why are there no women? And how did this town come to be if there are no women? For example, how did Todd become? How was Todd born if there are no women? So thinking things like that. And then pretty quickly into the book, Todd then has to run away from the town, and he runs into a girl called Viola. Viola has no noise, and she is obviously a girl, which is something he's never seen before. He's never met a girl or a woman. So instantly he is very taken aback and has a million questions, and Viola also is very confused by Todd. They kind of pair up and team up and try to help each other. They both have slightly different objectives, but they are both trying to get to somewhere called Haven, which is another town, in order to like solve their problems, and in order to work out the mystery of Prentisstown and of what they're running from, and of the danger that is chasing them. So yeah, all a little bit vague, but I think with dystopias, a lot of it is based on the world building. You really have to get like immersed into the world itself and understand what's going on and how it came to be, which I think is always really interesting with dystopia. The premise of this, I think, was really fantastic, and I think often with dystopia, if you get a good premise and something that you really enjoy, then the rest of the book is really easy to love, because yeah, I was just really gripped on the idea of all of these characters having noise, of where the women went, of how these towns came to be, and I really, really loved that. Todd as well is a really fun character. I think he's really vulnerable and really relatable, and I really, really did like him. I also love his relationship with Viola and the relationship he has with a couple of other characters as well. So that was really great. He also has a dog as well, called Manchi, who I really loved. So yeah, there was a lot to love about this book. There's one scene that's sort of towards the end, probably 3/4 of the way through, that was devastating, and personally I think unnecessary, given that this is a YA book, so potential to have quite young audiences reading it. I really hated that scene. I thought it was devastating and traumatizing, and I really wish it wasn't in there. But apart from that, I really loved the book, and I am really excited to continue with the series. I've already started number 2 in November, and then I'm going to read number 3 in December. So yeah, really excited for that. And I give this 4 stars just because of that one scene that I really hated. And if you've read it, please DM me and we can discuss. You probably know which scene I'm talking about, because it was horrible. I'm traumatized. I hate it. But other than that, yeah, I really love the rest of the book, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And finally is Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, or you've seen my Instagram or anything else, you'll know how much I love Nina LaCour. I've read 2 of her other books, We Are Okay, which was one of my favourite reads of last year, and also Everything Leads to You, which I read probably 2 or 3 years ago now, but both of those books I really, really love. Both of them have elements of romance to them, but I wouldn't really describe them as romances overall, and I think this is actually the same. I think Nina LaCour is very good at writing very like realistic and vulnerable and imperfect characters and storylines, and often romances are all of those things, so I think that's why they're included. So Yerba Buena has a dual perspective storyline to it. So it's our two main protagonists, who are Emily and Sarah, I think, yeah. And they meet, I think, when they're like in their 20s, but the book really delves into sort of their like childhoods, of how they came to be where they are, and like the professions that they're in, and what's happened in their life up until that point. And then it also talks a lot about their interaction, their relationship with each other, and then what happens after that. So it spans quite a long period of time, and I think a lot of the book isn't about Sarah and Emily at all. It's about them as individuals, and like I said, their family and their history, and what's happened to them that's like shaped them into the women that they are today. So so that was really interesting. It was definitely more hard-hitting and darker than I was expecting, which I should have realised, because We Are Okay and Everything Leads to You are young adult books, whereas this is an adult book, so I should have expected it a little bit more, but I think it's because it's not what I'm used to reading from Nina LaCour, so it just took me back a little bit. But it was done really well. I think it was done with a lot of respect and a lot of care for people who've had to deal with similar situations in real life. So I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings. Off the top of my head, things like addiction, of sexual assault, abuse, substance abuse, that kind of thing. But yeah, look up the trigger warnings if they're things that you might be worried about reading. So I think they were done very delicately, which was really, really good. And I think Sarah and Emily were both very likeable characters, and I enjoyed their stories and seeing how they kind of became the people they are today. However, what I didn't love about this book is that it wasn't enough about Sarah and Emily. I think we kind of start to get into it, but only towards the end, and it's sort of left in the middle of things, I think on purpose, because it has that like relatability, that realistic storyline. But I think that just meant it felt a little bit lacking for me, and I didn't really love it for that reason, which is a real shame, because I love her other books so much, and I can totally see how she's the same author that wrote We Are Okay, because they have such a acute pain to them, which We Are Okay had, and so I loved that. I love like the emotional depth, and I loved all of that, but I just wanted it to be more about Sarah and Emily, and more about the love that they have for each other, rather than the pain they've gone through in their history. So yeah, it was a bit tricky. Maybe if it had been a longer book and it could have just gone on, we could have seen more of their future, I think I would have liked it more. But yeah, ultimately it's not my favourite from her, so I give this one 3 stars. Okay, that is everything I read in October. It was actually really good. I think it was 2 3-stars, and then the rest were 4 and 5, so yeah, a really great month. I can't complain. I've got some good ones lined up for November, and then in December I'll be reading a lot of Christmas books, hopefully a lot of romance, because it's a perfect time of year for it, so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. Please check out my other videos, and you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My links are in the description, and if you like the video, please like it, and please subscribe to my channel. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye!